What was really amazing to me is the way that Frank and Matthew they were like very sonically deliberate, and I'd never seen anybody be like so like hyper musical and also like hyper creative. Like the two of them were both like, they're both very intelligent and highly creative. So like the chances that they were taking sonically were like really interesting to me.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. This week on The Record Process, we're talking to a true jack of all trades when it comes to studio wizardry. Travis Ference is an LA-based mixer, producer, and engineer who has worked with some incredible artists, the likes of John Mayer, Ariana Grande, and many more that have accumulated more than 15 million sales and nearly 1 billion streams worldwide. We're excited to pick Travis's brain about Lo-Fang's 2014 record, Blue Film, which he engineered and mixed. Nearly a decade after its release, Blue Film remains one of the most confounding and impressive releases in recent memory, and it all started during Travis's time engineering pop songwriting sessions for Capitol Records. The two hit it off, and 6 months after they met, the duo had completed work on Blue Film, marking the end of a 3-year process for Lo-Fang. This was such an interesting story to hear Travis tell, so we're going to get right into it after just a quick word from our sponsors. First, I'd like to thank DistroKid, who has graciously offered to sponsor this season of The Record Process. DistroKid is the most affordable service for independent artists to distribute their music to all streaming platforms, and it comes filled with a suite of tools to help you elevate your career. DistroKid not only allows you to spread your music across the streaming ecosystem, and yes, that includes TikTok, but it also helps you share your story with labels via the Upstream tool. You can engage your fan base using its text messaging feature and even create unique lyric videos. Record Process listeners now have a chance to get 30% off the first year of their membership at DistroKid. Just head down to the show notes and sign up using our affiliate link. We can't wait to hear what you've been working on, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at TrueLevelStudio.com/The Record Process and share your release plans with us for the upcoming year. And now, here's our interview. And next, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Sheet Happens Publishing. They're a company that works directly with artists to create accurate and immersive tab books, vinyl, and other merch that allows fans to get one step closer to perfecting the soundtrack to their lives. I recently had the pleasure of putting together a book with them for my band, The Wonder Years, and trust me, they are incredibly thorough and dedicated to artist-approved accuracy in all of these books. Every tab book comes with the accompanying guitar profiles, which is very cool, allowing you to jump right into playing along with your favorites. Head over to sheethappenspublishing.com to check out all of their offerings, and be sure to enter the code TRP15 at checkout for 15% off your first purchase. That's sheethappenspublishing.com, promo code TRP15. So go check out their amazing library of books, and happy shredding, my fellow guitarists. Travis Ference, welcome to The Record Process. Thanks for being here, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. How are y'all?
You know, we're here, we're alive.
We're here, we're living. Yes, indeedy. We all have our preferred beverages of choice. I think at least on our end, both highly caffeine rich. I don't know about you, Travis, but
it's tea. It's got some, not too much.
It's got some. That's not what. Honestly, do you care to share the blend before we get going? What kind of mood you're working with, you're curating for yourself?
You know, it's not fancy. It's just a green tea. You know, I don't want to sound like I'm not sophisticated, but it's delicious.
No. Honestly, that's a backbone tea. That's super good. Very antioxidant rich. I can tell that you're a man that cares about yourself, and we care about that, and we appreciate that. So that's good. That'll certainly do. But Travis, so cool to have you here. And I honestly don't want to waste any time because there's so much to talk about. You and I connected recently as we were chatting before this with a number of mutual friends in such a cool serendipitous way that, you know, actually ended up finding the work that you've been doing on your podcast, Progressions, which is incredible. And so we got to talking, and as we do, there's a story behind everything, just like with everybody that you've had on your show. And it's always really interesting. And then we got to talking about some of your work. where your career has brought you and the trajectory. And we landed on a really interesting project that you were a part of a few years back. And that's what we wanted to talk with you today about, if you would indulge us. And I would love to start out by saying, so the project is that of an artist by the name of Lo-Fang, Matthew Hemmerlein, who's an incredible songwriter and had been writing songs for quite some time. And it had kind of been, as you described before, kind of in that LA songwriting circuit and doing a lot of collaboration work, right?
Not actually.
Ooh.
Yeah, if I can just throw you off track right from the beginning.
Yes, strike one. No, honestly, I'm so good. Honestly, here we go. We're in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I met Matthew. I was doing just piles and piles of songwriting sessions as an engineer.
Right.
And I think at the time, Matthew was being courted by whatever publishing company he signed to or was signed to. I don't know if he still is. They were, and usually what they do is they'll take you to dinner, throw you in some sessions, see how you work with the writers. So he was actually, for the first time in LA, getting tossed into one of these writing camps. And so that's where we met. Is he got there early. The other pop guy was like late.
Fashionably, we hope.
Fashionably late. And I just remember Matthew it's super chill guy. And he was like, so, is there supposed to be somebody else here? Like, are we doing something? I was like, yeah, somebody's else is going to come. And he's like, are we writing? I was like, no, man, I'm the engineer. Like,
are you the guy?
I'm just here to hit record. And he's like, okay, cool. I brought a violin. And I'm like, you brought a violin?
To a songwriting session? Wow. Honestly, that would have been great I would have loved that. Yeah. So
I was totally caught off guard. And, he was probably caught off guard. Everybody was confused when we met each other. But he wasn't deep in that game. He was just like getting tossed in as a courtship thing, as they do.
Oh, wow. My God. So everybody was kind of off balance and in this weird, like awkward first day of school thing for a bunch of different reasons, running late. He's got a violin. You're just like, hey, man, I'm just trying to turn some knobs and have a good day. I got my green tea. Just relax. It's going to be fine. That's incredible. And then so fast forward, when was that when you first met him on that session?
I don't know. Let's see that. I have the record on Spotify. When did it come out? 2014. So that was probably 2014, 2013, somewhere in there.
Yeah, not long before the record came out. And that was the start of something that became really cool, which became the album Blue Film that he released, that Australian film composer / music producer, Frank Tetaz also became involved. But before we get there, I want to go back a little bit to mention how this was a pretty common thing for you when you were working out in LA initially at Capitol Studios, right?
Yeah.
At that time. And you had been doing a lot of, like you mentioned, you'd been doing a lot of these, like LA songwriting sessions, right? As an engineer.
Yes. So just to give you the 2-minute version of my story, I moved to LA, I don't know, 2006 maybe, worked at Capitol for a while, and then kind of saw that there wasn't going to be a promotion anytime soon. And I got an opportunity to go work with a pop songwriter and producer. So that's where I went from jazz orchestra, very high fidelity recording to the pop world.
Yeah.
And I did that for a few years. And then I thought to myself, I was like, man, I'm just working in this guy's basement. It was a great gig. We did a bunch of records, but I was like, I wish I was in the world again. And I was able to navigate my way back into Capitol because at the time, whatever year this was, I don't remember now, they were doing a joint venture thing with whatever this publishing company, it was probably EMI Publishing. They were doing a joint venture with EMI Publishing where they were going to be 2 or 3 pop songwriting rooms run by Capitol Studios for EMI Publishing writers. So that is how I ended up doing these daily writing sessions. And that's how Matthew ended up coming in because EMI Publishing was interested in signing him. So they're like, hey, go to our room. It's all paid for. It's part of the business, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure down the line, eventually he paid for it, but that first time he probably didn't.
Right. So because, obviously within the scope of an entire process in putting together an album like this, or even just a song, the songwriting stuff is something that we love to heavily focus on. And I know, a lot of incredible creatives such as yourself are always very song focused, right, at the core. So that's some perspective that, if you don't mind, obviously, just to set the stage, because I think it's interesting having someone with your background, seeing a lot of those. What is that songwriting session work kind of thing usually look like with a bunch of writers thrown in? And especially from your perspective, because I think, obviously a very talented engineer, and you have an incredible ear as a mixer too, but that's a bit of a different gig, and the dynamic, you get to kind of see that from almost the other side of the glass sometimes. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit of what that typically would look like, maybe up before and including what the meeting with Matthew and other projects like that. What does that normally look like, from your standpoint?
So, I mean, from the engineering standpoint, it's kind of like, I think the goal there, if you're engineering pop songwriting sessions, is like, it's like a level of invisibility, which, I kind of just slipped into from being like used to in the big studio world. It's like, hey, do your job, don't draw attention to yourself, that kind of thing. So it's really, as an engineer, not being any barrier to anybody's creativity. So like, as soon as somebody gave me a track, I had a little piano on my phone. I made sure I found the key for auto-tune, because some people want to sing with auto-tune on, some people don't. So you make sure it's on there, and you can bypass it or unbypass it, because if it's inactive in their recording, then you can't do that. You have to stop. The goal is to never stop recording for these people when they're like on the mic. And you just kind of have to feel the situation out, because when you're doing these sessions, and generally a lot of the ones that I was doing seemed to be like newer signings, because they were the ones that were always getting put on the blind dates by their A&R, right? And once you have some hits and you've written a bunch of songs, you have your favorite writers and you start setting your own sessions up. So there was a lot of like talking, a lot of people comparing signs, a lot of just like trying to find like a connection with somebody, and then like, what do you want to write about? I'm feeling this. My boyfriend just broke up with me, like whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so you just kind of have to let people get to know each other, but then you have to be ready to jump in and record. Like, I mean, I've gone so far as to like see that nobody was recording a melody on their phone in the room, and I dropped my phone into voice note just in case somebody was like, oh my God, did anybody record that? Or then eventually I was like, I don't want to do that. That sounds like a potential legal issue. So I started making sure there's always a mic in the control room. There's always a mic in the live room. And if somebody didn't want to hold it, I would just like drop it on the table, crank the gain up, mute it in the speakers, and like hit record, just to make sure that if somebody spit a melody out that they wanted to remember, that they would catch it. So like the whole game was, from the engineering side, is, make sure somebody can get their idea out and as quick as possible
and capture it and catalog it there. That's awesome. That's such a valuable lesson, especially for, you don't have to even be, at a big time studio like that. Just having that mentality and showing that kind of like value and foresight of like, hey, I've seen ideas come and then get forgotten, but we have the ability, and a lot of people, even if you just have a lot, just sit there and let it roll while you're doing that, while you're working stuff out, because you might catch that fragment or something. And if it's there, you can go back and find it. But if nobody, had anything on, so that alone is incredible. And that's kind of why I wanted to go back, because that inspiration stuff, especially when you get people very quickly throwing things back and forth, it's like kind of a chaotic whirlwind. And you're kind of there as that Sherpa to just like catalog and ingest all of that chaos, and then be the one to be like, no, I threw a marker down that time that you're like, yo, I kind of like that. So that's awesome, dude. And that's so valuable, especially for any of our listeners, if you're engineering or doing any session stuff like that, a bunch of great cues in terms of just like, hey, what key is this in? Let me figure that out. Like things like that. I love, dude. That's amazing. So thank you for sharing even just that little bit with us. Yeah.
Well, one more, I mean, even for your producer listeners, I mean, just like the simplicity of having a template that's ready to go, so that if somebody's like, oh, I don't want an 808, I want something more live, you already have like a contact kit with your drums loaded up. You have like everything ready to go. Because in like on the engineering side, like I had a vocal template where everything was set up. There was already delay. I recorded things to a specific level because I knew how all the plugins after it would react, including the reverbs and delays. So it's kind of like I knew it was going to be decent as soon as I started singing. So yeah, anything you can do from any end, producer, engineer, just to, make a writer's idea come out is always like, it'll be worth your time in the end.
Well, and that's so much like basically what you're saying too, even with the template stuff, and especially on that like major label and large commercial studio, that some of those like the songwriting sessions, the clients or whatever, they kind of probably want something and want to hear if anything came out pretty quickly. So the goal is to give that, and also to the artist, for them to be able to walk back and be like, all right, what's it sound like? To give them like the quickest like down and dirty take of something like, here's what it would frame out to be. And then that keeps like, and this is what I love about it too, because it's more than just, especially as an engineer and being ready like that, it's a lot less of like, and I've been guilty of this. We've all do it where it's just like, no, trust me, it's going to sound cool. Like when I, put some effects on it and tune it and do all that. But like what you're saying is like such a whole thing where you can keep this vibe going where somebody walks in and is like, hey, this does rip. This like I sound great. And then all of a sudden you're keeping their morale up at a high or even giving it like a little boost where they go back in and keep that kind of creative essence kind of going. So in that way, you are part of that process and a really important part too, in terms of, calibrating where the session goes across an entire day. So I love that. That's a great example. That's so much good stuff there, dude.
So Matt came in first day of school. Everyone's like, cool. So specifically for the Blue Film record, did Matt have these demoed out in any capacity, or was he coming in completely blank? Like, I guess what capacity did he bring these songs to you? Or was it like, hey, we're in the room, let's do it, and like build it from the ground up?
It was varying degrees. And as the process went on a little bit further, like he would have more in-depth demos. In the beginning, he may have also had in-depth demos, if I'm remembering correctly, but I didn't know that he had them. So like he was putting parts down in our first few sessions together, and I just thought he was making things up. He may have actually just not pulled his laptop out in the beginning and opened Logic. Eventually we got to the point where I knew all the things that he was going to record at Capitol, and I made sure that he could plug his laptop in, and like going back to that being set up thing, it was like, here's the vocal chain, here's the violin chain, here's the extra microphone, here's your keyboard, here's your laptop. And so it's like when he came in, it was like, all right, the studio is your toy now, and we're just going to go wherever you want. But it was varying degrees, I guess, is the answer to your question. Was
Frank there? Was it all of you? Who else was in the room for these sessions then? Was it usually Frank, or was he there for the conceptualization of this, or just more towards the end, or did that also vary from track to track?
This is kind of where it's interesting, because I didn't really realize what we were doing. So he just started coming back. And so after that initial session, right, he started coming back. So obviously he must have signed his deal or whatever. And so he keeps coming back to the studio. And then sometimes Francois would come with him, and then I could, Frank is he's very hands-on. He's massively talented, just a huge fan of his work. And so like, in the beginning, I kind of had that mentality of, I was like, Frank's in charge here. He's going to do a bunch of stuff. I'm going to chill and like go slip into assistant mode and make sure that, Frank can get on the computer when he wants to get on the computer. And then when Frank wasn't there, then it would be Matthew and I, or Frank would maybe go home for dinner, and we would do like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning all the time. Some of my longest sessions, people are like, oh, hip hop sessions go late. I was like, yeah, I did. I did an indie record till 5 o'clock in the morning too.
They're not the only ones. Yeah.
They're not the only ones that go late. So yeah, it was kind of I didn't understand what they were doing. I thought they were just co-writing. And then, I realized that there was like a body of work that we were like going back through. And then I started kind of doing more work. Frank started like not running Pro Tools, and I started doing the computer, and like then I started suggesting microphones. So it was like this, I don't know if how it ended is the way that anybody thought it would be when it started, but it ended with, the three of us making this record. But in my mind, when it started, it was just some writing sessions. He'd come in like 1 or 2 days a week. Sometimes he'd do 3 days in a row. And then it was just in and out. And it was just to me, it was, at the time, it was just the in and out. And I was like, oh, Matthew always wants to work with me when he's here. Cool. I like working with Matthew. He's fun. And then eventually it was like a month straight. He wanted to do 5 days a week for 4 weeks, and Frank was there all the time. And so, yeah, it was kind of this, like, it was morphing to whatever it was.
What do you think the tipping point was when you had that light bulb go on where you're like, wait a second, I'm not just the guy that's on the calendar to engineer the gig. Like, I think I'm part of this team right now. Like, I think we have a team, and we're gonna make a record now.
I don't remember if there was a specific point. I think at some point I started to interject a little bit, like try to do more work, because like I said, whenever Frank was there, I kind of became assistant and stood in the corner. And at some point, I definitely was like, I want to get in on some of this. I'm going to try some stuff. I've been watching these guys work for a week. I'm going to try to like guess, what, Frank might like, because kind of my opportunity to do that would be when he would go home and then Matthew would work for like 6 more hours, right? So then Matthew and I would capture a lot of content and, work on rough mixes or build some sounds. And the next day, Frank would be in for, the majority of the day, and we'd be working together. And eventually I think I guess now that I verbalize it, that's how I kind of ended up, engineering the whole constantly is by those being the one taking over when Frank would go home. So.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you started to become a little bit more invested in it, in the sense of like from a creative like itch to seeing it, starting to understand the scope of it, and then being like, oh, okay. Well, like, what if we, like any good, like creative, it's just like, well, what if we try this? And then, and they were open to it. And another big theme that we talk about on the record process and just in general as musicians, and producers, engineers, and just living, a creative like life in and out of the studio is this idea of trust and relationship building all throughout it. I'm so sure that this has come up as a recurring theme on Progressions as well in its own ways, but specifically in something like this where you're talking about sessions, you're in the trenches with people that are very vulnerable, and it's very tough because to offer an idea and have it be at the wrong time or have it, be pushed back on, you have to feel as though there's a degree of underlying trust and a current to be able to express those kind of things. So what do you think? What do you think helped build that trust? I mean, obviously you knew him and Matthew specifically, but what do you think helped build that trust as you went with Frank and Matthew in that capacity, and even between the two of them as you were kind of watching this all start to come together? Because that's a really big thing, and I'd love if you'd be willing to, from this experience and others, kind of talk about what you think maybe helped with that.
So there's a bunch of things that kind of came to my mind while you were talking. One being, like, up until that point, I'd worked at Capitol, and then I'd worked for this pop producer. I was doing a lot of things with people like for a day, 2 days, 3 days, like lots of in and out, lots of single songs. This was one of the first like records that I was like a part of that was a professional record where I got to like witness the whole thing, and it was more than one song. And so what was really amazing to me is the way that Frank and Matthew were like very sonically deliberate, and I'd never seen anybody be like so like hyper musical and also like hyper creative. Like the two of them were both like, they're both very intelligent and highly creative. So like the chances that they were taking sonically were like really interesting to me. So then I guess if we're going to talk about like winning trust over, as I started to be like, this is cool. This is a chance to like do something sonically deliberate, and like these two people are going to be like accepting of me taking a chance, and we're all comfortable enough with each other that if they don't like it, they're just going to be like, hey, we were thinking more like this, or I was thinking more like that, and I'm not going to be offended, and also they're not going to be offended that I offered up an idea. So it kind of just like, this is why I wanted to talk about this record, because it kind of shaped how I basically listen and make music like from then on out, because just of watching them work like this is what, kind of shaped how I approach everything now. It's like very deliberate. And I think the fact that I was kind of interested in leaning into what they were doing and, being on that path of that sonic deliberateness. How many times can I say deliberate? You gonna cut that out?
Hey, honestly, I love that phrase. So you can say it again if you wanted to, because I'm gonna take that and run with that. That's gonna find itself coming out again in the next couple of days of this week. Yeah.
No,
Travis, after we wrap on the podcast, we're gonna get you saying samples of it, like quiet, a little
sonic deliberateness. Okay,
louder. A rim shot version.
Yeah. That I think is the coolest part about like making that record or making any music like that, is when you hear this record or you hear other records that are made like deliberately like this, you like it or you don't, but you listen to it because you're like, oh shit, this is different. It's not like there's nothing about Blue Film that like plays in the background. You're like, whoa, what the fuck was that? Like, well, that was the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I hated it. Or that was the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I loved it. And so that's like the sonic deliberateness. I mean, I love that. And that's, what I took away. And I guess I haven't answered your question at all.
No. You more than answered it. Believe me. I love that.
This brought up a interesting thing that's like going through our minds was there any like sonic reference that they would be like, oh, this record that like we love this, like the string sounds on this record and we want to like kind of bring that in to this record? Or like, did you get a peek behind the curtain on that aspect of like what was influencing them?
There was a lot of listening, and that's something that is it's one of Francois', because I've worked with him on multiple records since. And he likes to listen to music with the artist and be like, what do you get out of this? And it's not like the things that we would listen to have like no relationship to like what we're listening to, but it's like a feeling thing that he's trying to get out of it. So, I mean, the only like specific references, which I can't remember, but a lot of the writing process revolved around samples. And so then when it came release time, the label obviously looked at the list of samples and they were like, we're not paying for these. So at some point we had to go in and replace, with, something that sonically fills that space, musically fills that space. And so that was like the only time we were specifically referencing things. But everything else, like we listened to a lot of music for like emotion and feel and like energy. So yeah.
Was there any one particular track that like you remember like being like, oh shit, yeah, right, this track? As far as like during the sessions of y'all listening to stuff, was there any like one song that like was just like it is very poignant to you that like stood out during these listening sessions?
I can't remember specifically like any tracks that we were referencing, but there was some like, I don't know if it was a French movie. There was some movie about a dolphin that had like this ambient score and like, dolphin talking, like that was like always kind of like a common thread in this like strange like way. I have no clue what it is, but that's the only thing I could think of that I remember is this like strange dolphin movie that got, the ending got played every week or two.
Travis, what I love about this and what you've just described and like is something that I know Tom and I have done, and I know a lot of other producers really love to do, and I think it's so wholly effective, is taking the time in not actually recording or not actually like even before you sit down and start to like dive into the compositional stuff or like trying things. It's getting on this page, and it's kind of exactly what I was talking about and mentioning like how to establish trust. It really is the perfect way to describe that. And I think a lot of times people look at like documentaries of like, it feels like 95% of it, they're just sitting in front of a console, not doing anything, or like, what are they doing? Like I haven't seen them record one thing yet, but so much of that is, especially if it's like a new relationship or even if it's not, it's understanding this common thread of direction, and you're doing that by taking reference material and seeing the thumbs up, the thumbs down, and sometimes it's not even like a verbal thing. It's like, you can tell that you it's like share and tell in its own way, Totally. Tom and I have done this with a lot of artists over the last couple years, where you come in and just sit down and be like, hey, where do you want to go with this record? Because that's a lot of times something that as an artist, especially if you're a young artist, you could kind of just go anywhere. There's no expectation. There's no like set, first step in a lot of things. And that's the best way to do it, is maybe not to say, hey, do you want it to sound like this? Do you want it to sound like that? But talk about moments and be like, man, I love how this, like the dynamics drop out here, and it just pulls you in. Then further that discussion with how can you do that? How can we whatever? And I love that that's even in a record like this is, spending the time doing that. And then the fact that everybody involved in it takes that away and sees the power of that as it can turn out into a record like this that has such a cool cinematic landscape at times and really intimate, foundation to it all. So I'm really glad that you shared that with us. Were there any other tracks on the record that maybe for this reason that you maybe, if you have a favorite standout track on the record, or something where you saw the power of these kind of listening sessions come to fruition totally, where you're like, you saw that direction come together?
There's a lot of moments, I think, throughout the entire record, like standout tracks for me that I've always really loved. Animal Urges was a song that I always really loved. Number 88 is another one that was a personal, like, big favorite of mine. But I think the one that like really encompasses like the whole process is the one that was the hit, if you're gonna be the one to label something a hit or not a hit, which is the Grease cover, You're the One That I Want, which was in a Baz Luhrmann directed Chanel ad with, Giselle and an actor, maybe he was one of the guys from Game of Thrones. But it was like, Chanel does like one big ad, like one thing a year, and this was the song for that, and there's a whole movie filmed around it. So that song is kind of the one that I think embodies all of the emotion and the deliberateness and everything. It all funneled into that piece of music.
Oh, wow. I got to check. I have to find that. I somehow didn't come across that yet, but Baz Luhrmann, has. Oh yeah,
I should have sent that to you.
No, yeah, has. We'll find it. It's gonna make its way in there. It's so interesting too. So we're kind of going in a non-linear fashion, because that's not how things work as we're talking, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not always one step in front of the other, but that is such a cool, pin in the end of the process, which we also talk about, and I think doesn't always get enough love, especially if you're talking about, independent artists and people that are really spending a lot of time making music, curating stuff, doing that creative exploration as an artist. Now I have this record, or I have this EP, or I have these group of songs. I don't know where to go with it, where to help them find an audience or to live or whatever. And there's so much of that, especially with art, where once you put it in front of an audience or marry it with some sort of live production, or, even in the simplest sense of music videos, right? Where there's an extra layer of transcendent power by putting those two things together. And that, you talk about Baz Luhrmann and, Chanel as a brand and everything that comes with it. And then this song, it's like, wow, what an incredible way to cement that into a crazy thing, and also probably, I'm sure people, at the label and otherwise didn't hate it. So I love that. That's such a cool thing. We'll have to find that and see what that turned out to be like. But yeah, what a cool thing. Did you, which song was that again? You mentioned
that was You're the One That I Want.
You're the One That I Want. Right. Well, I love that that's how this process kind of shook out initially. And I'd also love to, next kind of start to talk about a little bit of what it felt like just in the day to day, because you spend a lot of time at the studio, right? And I'd love to try and give people a little bit of a picture of, it very well, but the studio flow in general, and how that works out, and how that maybe influenced the way this record came out, and so you've seen it, you've seen how it works with every artist, that came through there while you were there. But I always think that like the location and everything, from the color to the vibe, the ambience, it's all very, like, a lot of people can be very sensitive to that stuff. So maybe just for anybody that's unaware, set the stage and what that workflow day to day looked and felt like, and how that maybe helped that process.
We should talk about these rooms that we were working in, right? They weren't the main Capitol Studios rooms that you're probably going to see. Actually, you'll never see these rooms because they don't exist anymore in the form that they were in.
Yeah.
But they were like, it was during that era of like corporate gray, right? Where everything is some shade of gray. As I sit in my slightly gray studio, so it was like gray, softer walls. It was in the rounder section of the Capitol building, so everything was kind of an odd shape. There was a window like on every door because they were like mastering edit, like QC suites before they were these writing rooms. And it was video camera link between the booth and the control room. Like, it was just all around kind of a, no offense to the guys that designed it and put it together, because they're all friends of mine, but a well-built bedroom studio. It was kind of like a little unassuming in that way, but then also kind of officey and uninspiring. So you didn't feel the pressure of like when you walk into Studio A and there's a giant console in a massive room that Frank Sinatra was in. You don't have that pressure / inspiration, depending on how you look at it. People look at it both ways. So there was something nice about that. It was like just a couch. You hang out on the couch. I sit at the chair. There was like a little Neve Genesis console in there. So it wasn't very inspiring, I guess, but it did have windows. People like windows.
Which is incredible, which already huge plus for anybody that's used to, that's not a typical studio layout asset that you're going to get.
Yeah. There were still offices on that floor, and those studios were new at the time. So it was still like, people like stick their head in, these are studios, and we're recording a lot of violin and cello, which are acoustic instruments. And for anybody that hasn't recorded a violin, for any of your listeners that maybe are just like in the box people, like it's not about miking the instrument. It's about like miking the space around the instrument. And so if you're in like a kind of a boxy, bedroomy space and you're trying to record a violin, you're not going to get this realistic violin because you're getting so much of the direct violin, and that's not really what the human ear is used to hearing. So we had a lot of things like stacked up against us, but in the end, it was we changed a lot of light bulbs, and we got these like blue lights or these color changing lights. We covered the window. Like there's vocals that he did on the floor with like couch cushions, like with the speakers on. We started doing stuff like waiting until everybody was gone. We did, it's not on Blue Film. It's an acoustic version of When We're Fire, which is on Blue Film, but it's called When We're Fire cello version. It's on his next EP. But we did that in the stairwell at Capitol, like in the middle of the night.
Oh, nice.
So we kind of like, we took this kind of semi-uninspiring space that was like loaded up with far more expensive equipment than like you should have had in a space that was this uninspiring, and just kind of had fun with it. And, we recorded things in the hallways and like whatever kept things light and fun. And like, so yeah, the vibe, I think the question was that the vibe is important in like setting the mood day to day, right? So that was kind of the space that we were in. And so when it came to like the workflow, like I talked about earlier, being set up and ready was what needed to be done. And since we weren't always working every day, I had to take a lot of notes. So it's like if I knew Matthew was coming in, I had to go get specific pieces of gear from the closet downstairs, make sure that those were available. The vocal went to this compressor and this mic pre with these settings that I wrote down from last time. The guitar went into this, and I load up his guitar. We were just using like Guitar Rig. And, the violin was DI, but then we would pop some pedals in there sometimes. Or if he wanted to do live violin, I had a ribbon mic for that. And, we even did drums in there one night and just got a really dead, tight, like 2-1-2 mic drum setup. So the goal was whatever Matthew wanted to do that day, we would do. And then as the project progressed, I started to understand like what we were doing, and we were getting towards the end. I started coming in early, like not like way early, because my boss would be like, "Why'd you clock in 4 hours before the session?" But it was like a weird space where I was working on the record, but the start time was 12, and so I would come in at 10, and my boss would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing." Like I'm working on the mixes. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "We're making a record." He's like, "What? What are you doing? You're in the writing room. You can't make a record in there." I'm like, "No, we're making a record in there. Don't worry about it." That's why the window's covered. And so like I would come in, I would do edits that needed to be done or work on mixes. And then, Frank and Matthew would come in, we'd listen to whatever I did. They'd be like, "Oh, that's cool, but we want to do vocals today." And so it was, it was a creative atmosphere despite the visual aspect of it. Or the surroundings, and whatever, people wanted to do, I made sure that was what we did. And it's like, there was always plenty of microphones plugged in, which made setting these things up like kind of a pain. Is, to work for like 2 days and like load a bunch of gear up the elevator and like mic stands and microphones, and then take it all back downstairs after like a 14-hour day. So it was definitely a lot of work, and I was super excited when he booked like a month straight. I was like, all right, finally. So that was kind of the flow.
So you have the record. It's all like edited, all like track down. I'm assuming like Frank gave the thumbs up of like, yeah, this is great. This is cool. What was the next step? Like, did Matthew like, was it like immediate like, oh, we're in mix phase, or was it like I lost track of these guys like 2 months ago and now they come back and now it's like, oh, we're going into mix phase?
We were mixing as we went. So eventually, I don't know the specifics. Like at some point, the record label came into play. So there was no record label when we started.
Cool.
And so then at some point there was a deal or a potential deal pending delivery, pending what the final record looks like. I don't remember like the business aspects of it, and it's probably not my place to say, but at some point there was some kind of delivery deadline. And I don't know if that was delivery deadline to sign a record deal or delivery deadline because you signed a record deal. But at some point we had a deadline. And so that's when there was still a couple songs we were just trying to crack the code on, but that's when we would move around a lot. So we would stay fresh. We'd work on like 2 to 4 songs a day, like just for a couple hours. So we'll work on the mix on this for a little bit, and we'll jump back, do some vocal takes on something. Matthew can rest his voice while, Frank edits. And it was very much a co-mix with Frank, and I learned a lot watching him work. And so, yeah, so definitely I wouldn't say that I mixed the record by myself. It was, us back and forth, but just the way that he worked inspired me to like try to emulate it like when he wasn't there. So it was kind of cohesive throughout. But yeah, so eventually there was a deadline. And so when the record was done, it was done. Like one day we were just done. And then the only thing that happened is shortly after, like maybe a month or two, You're the One That I Want landed the placement. And so they wanted to make it a little bit more lush, a little bit more like epic. And so we went back for 2 days to kind of tweak some things. And I think we had picture. That's what happened, is we wanted to go back and we wanted to tweak the mix after seeing the film. That's what they wanted to do. Because it was like a very cinematic film that Baz Luhrmann made. And so we wanted to make sure that the music was as cinematic as, as the film was, because we didn't make it, for where it ended up landing. So.
Wow, I love that. So did you, from a mix standpoint, was it mostly just layering stuff on there, or did you just take this down? I mean, you had the sessions, obviously. So how granular did you get in terms of reverse engineering to accompany that and change up the character of it?
From a technical side, we went to Studio C at Capitol into a better monitoring situation. We booked a day in there. The way that I was mixing the record on the Neve Genesis is there was 16 channels. And so I was basically using the Neve Genesis as a 16-channel summing bus. And so I just took that hard drive downstairs, all the same plugins, because it's the same studio, and put it on 16 channels of an Neve 88R. And we started there with a recall that was very similar, same mix bus and everything. And then I think what it was is that since it was going to have a lot of ears on it and that it was a big moment, I think everybody involved just wanted to be like, hey, we're going to spend a day on this song and make sure that it's great. I mean, we didn't add parts or change anything. It was just like, let's give this another 8 hours and make sure that this is 50 million streams good or whatever it is.
Gotcha. Love it. Yeah, no, dude, that's amazing. I mean, and that's true too. So, I mean, not that you were making a bedroom record, but in some ways, yeah, I mean, that's a testament to, in terms of what it looked like. Sure, you had access to some great outboard gear, some mic locker, like all of those things, but you didn't need necessarily the A room for a month straight to make, you know what I mean? Which is, I think, really anybody that's making records right now, whether you're an artist or on the, engineering, mixing, producing side of things, you probably know that, it's just not feasible to come in and sit around and do a violin overdub or like vocal back harmonies in an A room. A, you don't need it, but B, that's just not how it's getting done. So I love the fact that you moved around, and then when it was was finally time, you went in and you said, hey, we're going to I mean, how many rooms were in Capitol? A through what? Was it just the 3 of them?
So the main studio is ABC, and then the rooms that I was in, grammar's hard.
That's why we do this.
There was just, yeah, exactly. There's just 2 of those, and they've changed. I think they have ABC now. One of those is D, one's E. Like I said, the rooms that I worked in don't exist anymore. They've been upgraded and rebuilt like in a totally different manner. But the other thing I was going to say is we did utilize that A room. So on some of the lusher tracks that like there was a lot of string parts because Matthew would play is a amazing violin and cellist. Would just lay out these orchestrations, and like we would do things like I'd get him to step away from the microphone, or I would at some point I think I may have even started using 2 microphones, so you didn't get so much of that like violin phasey thing.
Yeah.
But we went down in the middle of the night, one night down to Studio A, and I set up a couple mics in the live room A, and we just pumped violin, and we just did some reamping to give some like life and air to a few of the tracks that needed some, and nobody knows that we did that except for us and everybody listening. Hey. And so we got a little bit of free action down there in Studio A every once in a while.
I mean, shout out to that. All thumbs up for that. We love the guerrilla style covert ops in the middle of the night. All here for it. Right. Yeah. I love a good rogue reamp. And that's 2 great phrases that I'm going to write down. The rogue reamp.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah. But that's a perfect example. And what I love so much about it to say that, yeah, when you feel the need for something or want that bigger space, go and get it for portions of the record that really benefit from it, and that's almost to say that just like in a world now where, again, with everything that from like, Universal Audio, like the stuff with like Apollo, like pre's and gear and that are so available and so much more affordable than they ever have been. Sure, the analog tools, that like everybody would love access to for the sound and the option, but like you don't need the $3,000 a day room to make a record that sounds like a $500,000 record, right? Like you just need someone like yourself and like Frank and a great artist like Matthew that's going to give you the performances and things like that. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I love it because it's because you were working out of a legendary studio and you had incredible gear and tools. And even there, you're like, you know what? This record doesn't need that right now. You know what I mean? Like it was still made and was still wildly successful. And then in that moment, you said, hey, we're going to put like another day's worth of C room money into just making sure this mix is like extra tip top notch. And that was an incredible call. And that's all part of the progression of it. So I love that peek behind the curtain of how that all came to be. And I can't wait to go watch the ad. That's truly what I will do as soon as we leave here today. And I will give you feedback on it and let you know all about my emotional response to that and Perfect. How Tom and I viewing of this obscure French dolphin movie from the 70s pans out as well. So
perfect.
With that all being said, I appreciate so much running us through all of this. And I implore if anybody hasn't listened to this record, obviously for so many reasons that we've just described here, I highly encourage you to do so because it's a beautiful sounding record, as well as digging back through the rest of, obviously, we will link out to all the stuff that you have done, Travis, on your website. Where can people find you? Quick plug for yourself.
TravisFerence.com. You can find me there. You can, if you Google that, I'll pop up towards the top. T Ference on Instagram. That's probably the best place to go. I'm on the other ones, but I don't check them. If you're interested in my podcast, you can find that through my personal Instagram. You can also just Google that. That's called Progression's Success in the Music Industry. I think that's it. Reach out, send me a message. I like meeting new people, so don't be shy.
Yes, do not be shy, y'all. With that, what is ahead for you in the rest of 2022, my friend? What do you have that you can maybe give anybody a taste of, or that you're really excited about?
I don't know. Let's see. What am I doing in 2022? I don't know when this comes out, but I may have a baby.
Oh, so congratulations!
That's going to happen.
Hey.
So that's why there's a little bit of a question mark. So I know.
Yep.
2022, I'm going to spend a lot of time raising an infant. That's the only thing I know for sure. The podcast is going through all of 2022. I'm going to, I say this every year, make a little bit of my own music that, you probably don't want to llisten to that unless you want to hear some ambient noise.
Oh, I love ambient noise.
There you go. Well, then this is for you.
What's up, man?
Two people here. We will be your accountability coaches on the Travis Ference solo record if need be.
Done. But I'm just, making music with people I like. That's like where I want to live now, is like making the records I want to make with the people that I want to make. And I feel fortunate to be able to do that. So, we'll see what pops up.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. And please be well and continued success with the greatest gig that life can bring one, that of fatherhood. And we will talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks. Good hanging.
I really hope you all enjoyed that episode and listening to that interview as much as Tom and I did, being a part of it. Travis is an incredibly talented engineer and mixer. That much is very well apparent if you listen to this or any of the other projects he's been a part of. But I love the takeaways that he weaved into this lesson, and that this story can kind of teach a lot of other creatives moving forward. Things about the idea of being ready and being prepared as an engineer, and in sessions like these, and also understanding that you never know when your next collaborative journey is going to begin and who's going to walk into that room, and that being a facilitator of a really positive creative space can do wonders, not only for your career as an engineer, but also as a songwriter, as a musician, as someone that is trying to make whatever project they are a part of bigger, better, and bolder. So I love that about Travis and this story specifically. So go take a listen to this record if you haven't already. Make sure to give it the time and space it deserves. And when you're done that, Travis also has a podcast of his own called Progressions, where he has some amazing guests on the show to talk about their careers in music and their creative journeys as well. I was lucky enough to be a guest on one of the episodes, so you can start with that one or just dive in wherever you want. It's a great show, and you can hear more from Travis on there. Finally, if you've been enjoying season 2 of The Record Process, if these interviews are resonating with you, if you're getting a lot of enjoyment out of them, all we ask is that you take a quick second and share it with a friend or someone in your life that you think might also enjoy it. If you're feeling extra generous today, by all means, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I know it seems like a very small, insignificant thing, but I'm telling you, it would absolutely mean the world to us to hear from anybody that's listening, because it is that kind of feedback that can keep us all going on our own creative journeys. But if you were looking for a little incentive to do so, we're actually extending our giveaway with our partners at IZOTOPE. You can check out all of the details in the show notes. It's super simple. All you have to do is share an episode using the hashtag TRP giveaway and follow the directions to our website, where you can join our mailing list so we can get a hold of you when we pick a winner. And with that, we will catch you next week on The Record Process.